SPD.
As one of its very beneficial side effects that people get used to being in this country together. Toleration at the macro level begins with such micro encounters. I recall a story told by James Carroll, who is a former priest who lives in Boston, a columnist there and an author of a number of books. He was talking about how it came about that the Roman Catholic Church issued its declaration on relations with the Jews, apologizing for Christian, at least Catholic, anti-Semitism over so many centuries. It began with a mixed marriage in the cardinal's family. He had, and I think it was his sister who had married a Jew, or maybe it's the other way around. At any rate, food comes into the picture somewhere. He had many happy meals in this Jewish household, and it bothered him that there was this official enmity. Well, encounters of that sort often begin in school relations and classmate relations, and the more a kind of casual toleration of that sort can be allowed, the less likely it is that entrenched divisions will bedevil our life later on. In that connection, it occurs to me to mention a very American move that the Muslim Public Affairs Council recently made, issuing a set of guidelines for relations between Sunnis and Shias, things that a polite Shia ought not to say about Sunnis and a polite Sunni ought not to say about Shia. Now, this is all on the near side of any kind of government establishment of religion. It's a kind of good manners, but it seemed to me, the arrival of a kind of pluralism within the American Muslim community, and one of the reasons why I believe the American Muslim community will eventually have a very prophetic role to play in world Islam.
Chris?
Well, I mean, this sort of presupposes that there's something good about the mainstream. Having lived
something good about the mainstream.
Not much. Having lived 20 years outside the United States, I mean, these are questions that you just don't ask. I mean, it's, that kind of, it is a really attempt, by enforcing any kind of code like that to destroy one's individuality, one's tradition, and we as a country did a pretty good job of doing that to African Americans, to the point that we even took away their names. And I think it's something that we should be particularly sensitive to. The point is to get the kids into a classroom and hand them Thoreau's Walden. The point is to get them to think. And it really doesn't matter what they wear.
Reza?
Boy, it's a really radical audience here. Yeah. Screw the mainstream. No, I'm totally with you. The thing is that Chris and I went to the same seminary, and this is what they teach you there. I'm not kidding. I think, look, this question about assimilation versus isolation, all you have to do is see what the rest of the world is doing. Europe does not have a conception of accommodating or assimilating these kinds of religious ideologies into the larger society, and they are having a terrible time of it. The kinds of radicalization that we see in the UK and in France, and which simply do not exist in the United States, are more than just economic factors. Yes, it's true in the case of the Muslim community here in the U.S., they're very well integrated. They're, very wealthy. They're very much a part of every sector of society. But it's more than that. I think that the reason that there is such accommodation, that there is such simple assimilation and integration here in the United States, whether you're a Jew or a Muslim or Hindu or Sikh or whatever, is that we do have a conception here that religion does have some role to play in the public realm. Maybe it's too great a role, no question. And maybe it has far too much influence in our laws and certainly in our foreign policy. But we understand that faith is not something that should be shunned from the public realm. And I think that that creates a level of comfort, particularly for immigrant communities and people of other faiths besides Christianity and Judaism, that makes them much more likely to not just assimilate into culture, but also to moderate their own religious viewpoints and their own ideas. When I travel through the Middle East, especially, it's amazing how often you hear, "Death to America! Death to America!" Can I get a visa? Because there is this recognition, and I'm not kidding when I say this, that there is no country on this earth that gives Muslims the rights and the freedoms and the privileges to worship their religion however they see fit than the United States. They may hate our government, but they would do anything to have our lives. So again, I think you have to kind of have this notion, okay, if political participation is a cure for religious radicalism, it's a way of moderating religious extremism, and if that's true in Lebanon and it's true in Palestine, then it's got to be true here in America too, whether we like it or not, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us. There is a real fear of this kind of radical, particularly Christian evangelism that has so thoroughly snaked its way into the highest levels of the government. But nevertheless, to talk about rooting that out, it can be somewhat dangerous because we have to be very careful not to violate those ideas of freedom, the conceptions, particularly of the way we view faith and religion in this country and the freedom of faith and religion in this country. We have to be careful not to violate those ideas, and sometimes to not violate them, we sometimes have to put up with some distasteful consequences. So again, I know I feel like I'm the guy dithering here back and forth, but nonetheless, I know that this is not just theory, and I don't want to make it sound as though I'm just speaking theoretically. But it is very important for us in recognizing the alarm and the dangers of this kind of religious radicalism to also understand that in most cases, the best cure for religious radicalism is assimilation, is integration, is participation, so that the people themselves can choose to adopt or ignore these ideas, these values, these traditions. And because this is such a small group, I think that's sort of inevitable. The rejection of those ideas is almost inevitable.
Let me follow up with Reza, and then Chris, I'll invite you to make your comment. Last night, Lawrence Wright won a book prize for The Looming Tower, a really compelling book about Al-Qaeda. And he makes the point, and I'm very mindful of it when I suggest that somehow allowing people to wear headscarves and wash their feet in public schools will solve the problem of Islamic violence. I'm very mindful of the fact that the men who piloted the planes into the World Trade Center were in fact very cosmopolitan, highly educated. They had lived in America. It didn't do anything to moderate their idea about Islam. In fact, it made them into extremists. And I'm wondering, Reza, if you have can shed any light on that phenomenon, that when the fundamentalist comes to the West, in some cases he returns even more violently fundamental than when he arrived.
Yeah, well, I think first of all we have to eschew this notion that somehow all religious Islamic extremists have the same ideas or ideologies or grievances or tactics or agendas. It's simply not the case. Al-Qaeda and the larger jihadist movement that they represent, and by jihadism I'm referring to the transnationalist movement of militant Islamic Puritanism, Arab Islamic Puritanism, that Al-Qaeda is such a integral part of. But there is a world of difference between Al-Qaeda and Hamas, or Hezbollah, or the Kashmiri militants, or even the insurgency in Iraq. And so, we talk all the time about, well, the key to solving terrorism is social and economic development. That's the key to solving terrorism in Lebanon. It's the key to solving terrorism in Palestine, but it has no effect on jihadism whatsoever because the jihadists want nothing. They have no political agenda whatsoever. Their nominal goals are absurd even to them. They're not going to recreate the caliphate. They have no interest in. They know that these are impossible. Bush talks more about their goals than they talk about their goals. So, of course, as a movement that's really a social movement more than anything else, and that is using these symbols of jihad to create not just a collective identity, but to spur collective action, of course it's going to be made up of the best and brightest, in the same way that the radical anti-globalization movements are the best and the brightest. Those are middle-class kids throwing firebombs, not poor kids. So that's not unusual, it's not surprising, but we're not talking about jihadism. Jihadism wants nothing, they have no goals, they have to be rooted out, they have to be destroyed. Simple. But for